Hello there. Uh, I had planned on doing this video a while back, then there was the announcement for the gear filters, quote unquote, and now we've been waiting for what seems to be about 2, if not 3 weeks now, so I figured why not actually end up doing this. Uh, the concept here is just going to be going over kind of what I use as a process for cleansing. I am going to try to do this in a slightly more mid to early endgame mindset, because otherwise it's basically just selling 95% of your gear, and I should probably actually do some sorting on my own gear, because I have way too much stuff that I'm never going to use anyways. But that is not really point of the video here. You can generally separate most gear into 3 distinct... You're going to want to fill one of 4 distinct roles, essentially. Either you're going to trying to be gear a DPS, or you're trying to gear a tank, healer, or a crowd control slash just champion that wants to spam his ult often. And we're going to start with just damage dealers. For the most part, you're going to want to be interested in only a few select sets for this. So in the 2-piece, this is Warlord, Wicked Vengeance, Calamity, Annihilating Might, really. The other ones just aren't really worth it. Debatably Whirlwind, but, you know, it's probably not worth it. In the 3-piece sets, we're going to have a lot more Hell's Lament, Soulbond, Arcana, Ageless, Wrath, Infernal, Roar. Insight is trash, so let's not care about that one. Wisdom, yes. Doom, possibly. Night Terror. Realistically, you can start getting interested in the Hawkeye, but I don't find that one to be particularly useful. Those are the main ones. And the same is true for all of them, really. You're going to want in a main stat just really either attack or crit damage. There are very few cases where you're going to want to keep a non-ancient crit rate or attack speed. So essentially the idea is to pick one of these and then do the rest with them. So in this case, you know, if you take attack, you're going to want generally at least these 3. Those are going to be the main priority ones. And for stat number 4, it kind of depends on the content you're looking for. For GB2 Samura, for a lot of the champions, you're going to want some HP. That's pretty much the only piece of content where I actually care about this HP bonus. To a lesser extent, maybe if you're trying to build some somewhat tanky damage dealers for, say, I don't know, GVG or any PvE content that actually requires more HP. It is somewhat interesting to keep some of them, but it's a minor one. Rage regen is a big one. Having even just one piece significantly increases how fast you can cycle your ults, so that's a very good 4th stat to have as a substat. And flat attack, obviously. Any Arbiter will generally greatly enjoy this flat attack. And that's really it. Obviously, if you're swapping in for crit damage, you just do that. And going through, right, anything that completely matches, that's probably something you want to keep and roll up to +8. Sorry, let me just remove the quads, because that kind of depends on where you are in the game. Anything that doesn't match is just immediate garbage. Actually, speaking of, what even is this? Why am I keeping this? There we go. So that's really just roughly the concept here. Obviously, you know, then you can start being interested in those sets. For example, remove this. Choose basically any single other main stat. You're going to want to trash all of these. So all of this, unless you're at a point in the game where, say, you can't build a good tank set, or see, like this. Why am I still keeping this? But unless you're keeping these for specific reasons, so this is for, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but crowd control champions or tank champions or healer, because you cannot build the actual sets for these classes yet, then there's no reason to keep all of this. This is something that I should be purging actively. See, this attack speed rage regen might be interesting. But that's basically how you're going to cleanse for damage dealers on these sets. Let's just reset this real quick. And move on to tanks. Tanks, really, you have only so many sets. You have the Immortal Warrior, you have the Lifeforce, and that's pretty much it. None of the other ones are really worth it. And in 3-piece, you're going to be looking for Tempered Will, Unshaken Will. None of these really. Arguably Invigoration for some content, mainly PvE, where you can pull that off. And where's Guardian? Right there. And to a much, much, much lesser extent, Asclepius. And to pretty much at the same level as Asclepius, you could possibly build some tanks in Mana Spring. I run a Cyrene in Mana Spring. That's about it. As main stats, you're going to almost exclusively want HP. Just because HP will give you survival against every single form of damage dealt, whereas death is going to provide virtually nothing against magic damage. That being said, some champions that base a certain amount of their abilities off of defense, like say Gan, Trusk, any of the ones that will stack defense over time, will get some interesting value out of having 1, if not 2 defense pieces. And you can, for almost all tanks, you can get away with a build that is 2 HP and 1 defense, especially if it completes one of these 3 sets. Tempered Will, Unshaken, whatever, and Guardian. If it completes one of those 3, take it. It's more than worth it. Relative to substats, I do talk about this a little bit, but let's take the example of HP, right? Again, if you're doing defense, you just swap the main stats that you're looking for on the secondary, but you're almost always going to want defense. Great. Now, with that out of the way, besides champions like Olag, or which, you know, there's really no benefit in cycling the ultimates, Rage Regen is one of the most useful stats to have as a third stat on a tank. Because for champions like, say, Brockier, Baron, even, realistically, even Gon, being able to get more rage when you hit and when you are hit is pretty huge. It's kind of what makes the difference between a Brockier that is freezing you consistently in GVG and one that is just sitting there and taking hits. Past that, you can toss in, and here it kind of depends on how reliant you are on your ultimate with this champion, either attack speed or HP, and then def. So it could look something like this, it could look something like this. It really doesn't matter all that much. The main stats you're going to want is really just those percentage ones and Rage Regen when possible. Now, Rage Regen is, at least for me, significantly rare to get. As soon as I add it in, the number of pieces you can see back here are just insignificant. If I drop this, it's still kind of insignificant, but it's much, much better. So this really kind of depends on what you're looking for and what you can afford to build, but those are going to be your main priorities, and you're going to want to try to stick to that as much as possible. Tanks that don't rely on their ult, really all they want is this. That's arguably a perfect piece. Anything else does not matter. That force stat, just flat out garbage. And that's really all the specificities for tanks, so we're going to go ahead and reset that again and move on to our healers. In terms of actual gear that is good for them, this starts to depend massively on if it's an HP or a attack-based healer. But there's Warlord, Light's Grace, Lifeforce, Whirlwind, and Salvation. And actually, to an extent, also Immortal Warrior, because that's what you're going to want for HP healers past, once you actually get to that point in the gear rates. That being said, for healers on a left side set, chances are the best ones are going to be either Whirlwind. Sorry, I'd forgotten Calamity earlier. Whirlwind, Calamity, Warlord, Immortal Warrior, and maybe not even Light's Grace, honestly. The problem is healing effect is extremely easy to get. And as we go into the 3-piece sets, if I just take a quick example here, if I go for the sets that we're interested in, so that is Morale, that is Invigoration, and that is Asclepius. That's basically it. None of the other ones provide any form of significant boost to a healer. There is maybe Mana Spring, at a much lesser extent, and if for some reason you're really inclined on surviving, you're taking a lot of damage, maybe Tempered Will of Guardian, but honestly, you probably shouldn't be running those. For these, right, the difference between attack percentage pieces as mains and healing percentage pieces, especially for Ancients, is absolutely massive. So there are very few, there are no, at least for me, there have been no drops of Ancients in these sets with attack as a main stat. There have been a few, one, and only in Asclepius, with attack speed. So that's kind of bad. Well, okay, some of my gear is equipped. My best gear is equipped, so we won't be seeing it here. So it is there. It's just there are very, very few of them. And I could always use more. But the way you're generally going to want to build this is, depending on which piece you're building it for, attack bonus, attacks, yes, and basically in this order I would consider it, attack bonus, attack speed, and healing effect. Healing effect will start having diminishing returns past 100 and change. And the sweet spot seems to be at about 150. I could be somewhat wrong on this, but from the testing I did, and this testing is available on the GitHub and explained exactly why, it's about 150. Rage Regen is also technically a good option, depending on which champion you're building for. I believe Midan, for example, in Guild Boss 2, I build with Rage Regen on one of her pieces. But once you have chosen your main, it's really just the same concept. You go through the substats. So if I'm trying to get an amulet for a healer with attack speed as main, I will want attack percentage and rage regen and healing effect. And these amulets I know are worthwhile. They have everything I need. These are okay. There's attack speed. This is actually a HP one, so that's semi-decent. This one is bad. There's no real defense percentage-based healer besides Mariel that I am aware of. It's really not worth it. But I'm keeping it just in case. Because I tend to be paranoid about stuff like this. And then you cycle again through the, different variants. You trash speed, and you put it back as a substat, and you look at what you have, and so on and so forth. And those will be your best pieces. Now, all of these, or most of these, I've been doing with 3 substats or more. If you're just earlier in the game, you kind of just drop one of these substats, and it's still a good piece. It'll still help you. Just, less so. But that basically will cover your needs for a healer. So let's reset one final time and move on to the very last category of champions, which are the CC/ult cycling ones. For those, there's really only 2 sets that are interesting on the left side. It's Light's Grace and a Whirlwind. That's it. The rest just doesn't really bring you anything. As far as 3-piece sets, there starts to be more options here. Morale and Invigoration being basically the two best ones. If you can get the rolls high enough. Because they will provide damage boosts to the rest of your team, and that is phenomenal. If not, Mana Spring is also an extremely good one. This will basically allow low-cost ult champions like, say, Greed, and that's pretty much all I'm aware of in terms of crowd control champs that has such a low ultimate cost to cycle their ultimates extremely quickly, which is great. That's what we want here. Main stats, you're basically just going to have two that you're really interested in. It's Rage Regen and Attack Speed. That means that for the Bengals, you will just have nothing. The main stat doesn't matter. You could put virtually any of these, even the flat stats, and that is perfectly fine. They will do the job. So say I have my attack speed one, and you know what? Let's go with Rage Regen. Say I have my Rage Regen one. I'm going to want that attack speed as a secondary stat, and then again, it doesn't matter. Anything past this point is just frosting, icing on the cake. Those are the only two stats you're really interested in. Anything else is a detail. Of course, if by some miracle you can pull off having a, say, attack speed amulet and all of this on it, that's phenomenal. It gives you some extra damage. It's still probably going to be insignificant, but it is there. And again, everything with don't match at all, just trash it throughout this entire process. Everything that does no attributes mashing your combination of sets and stats, you should probably be getting rid of. Again, I go back to what I said a little bit earlier here. This depends on where you are at in the game. If you are earlier on in the game, you're going to want to keep more of these pieces, even if they don't fully really match, just because your options are extremely limited anyways. And that's basically all of your gear needs that are covered at this point. Anything that did fit the bill, you technically want to lock throughout. So say I actually liked this thing, which I don't, by the way. But say I did. I would click on it, I would lock it, and I would move on with my cleanse. If you don't like it, you just ignore it and move on. And at the very end, if you're sure that you have gone through all of your gear, you can do a select all and sell. I will not be doing this right now because there's a bunch of gear that I don't personally lock just because I'm at a point where I don't really kind of care about this kind of process. And my gear cleansing in itself tends to be this, followed by this, followed by rolling everything up to plus 8, 12, or 16, depending on my mood of the day, and selling everything that isn't great. And by great, I mean really great. This would probably get up. A lot of this stuff would probably end up being sold. But that's how I've been doing my cleansing for most of my time on War, and that's probably how I will continue doing it, except now the only difference is that I end up doing it at the end of a series of auto battles. And yeah, I don't believe I have forgotten anything. I do plan on making the gear filters for this in an as detailed manner as possible as soon as they are actually out, if they ever do come out. But hey, in the meantime, that's kind of what you have here. And I would like to point out that I do also have a text version of this present on the GitHub, as usual. I do try to have one of these as much as possible, or most content that I could think about covering. It goes over much of what I just already said, listing some of the different stats for different quote-unquote classes. I don't believe I have crowd control in here, actually, so I will probably have to add that, but that's besides the point. I've mostly covered what I wanted to say, and I'm just rambling at this point, so cheers, and have a nice one.